Good evening, this is Viewpoint. We're starting off with some breaking news coming through as far as Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan is concerned. Her flight is en route to Taipei, and we're given to understand that she will land there later tonight, but tensions are already running high between Taipei and Beijing. As the U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi is headed to Taipei, she's expected to touch down in the next hour or hour and a half. Several Taiwanese government websites, including the president's official website, was reported down just a few hours ago. The Taipei airport has received as many as 3 bomb threats within the last 24 hours. Clearly, things are ratcheting up. Certainly, the rhetoric has been ratcheted up by Beijing ahead of Nancy Pelosi's visit. She's expected to be there for exactly 24 hours, meet with the President Tsai Ing-wen, as well as go to the Museum of Democracy in Taipei. Clearly, this Asia trip of hers was planned many months ago. She had COVID in April and then had to postpone it. But the fact that she's going to Taipei, and not the first time that a U.S. speaker has gone to Taiwan, Newt Gingrich had gone back in the 1990s, so this is the first time a U.S. House of Representatives speaker is going to Taipei in 25 years. And Nancy Pelosi, all her life, all her political career, has been a China hawk, as it were. So clearly the Chinese have taken grave offense. The level of rhetoric has clearly gone up, but is that going to be matched by commensurate military action of any kind? So far, we're seeing some videos on social media, and CNN News 18 is not in a position to independently verify those, but some videos on social media seeming to suggest that small tanks and armored personnel carriers are being moved in Fujian as well as in Xiamen. These are the 2 southern cities that are closest to the coast of Taipei. And clearly, the Chinese wanting to send out a message. The first image that we got was from Fujian. The second one, the one at the beach, was from Xiamen, which of course is a popular tourist resort for Chinese nationals and also indeed for foreign citizens. Let me now go across to our guests who will be joining us. First, I want to go across to James M. Dorsey, who is a senior fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at the Nanyang Technological University. We'll also be joined by Michael Kugelman, South Asia expert at the Wilson Center. We're also joined by David Lyon. He's the author of The Long War and senior journalist, and Rakesh Sood is former Indian diplomat. Welcome to the program, gentlemen. I'm sorry we were discussing Zawahiri. That was what the program was supposed to be. But because of these dramatic events that have happened in the last hour or so, just want to get a word from each of you on what's happening vis-a-vis Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taipei. Let me start with Ambassador Rakesh Sood. Ambassador, do you reckon that, and this is the layman question on top of everyone's mind, will she land there? And if she does, will this lead to some kind of military confrontation between China and Taiwan?
I think it would lead to heightened tension, certainly. I think she's traveling in a military aircraft. I'm sure she will land there. It is quite possible that the Chinese may try some kind of cyber offensive measures, but they would be geared more towards Taiwan than anything else. However, in the long run, I think what it will do is it will reinforce the China-Russia sort of, their maybe alliance is too strong a word, but that particular link, because I think we see that there is now this growing pressure on both countries, which pushes them together, as it were. Mm-hmm. We also saw just a little while ago that in 2022, President Putin, who's otherwise not been traveling, has made just two trips. One was to China, of course, in February, and the second one was to Iran last month.
Correct.
Again, so you see the coming together. You also see the growing relationship between China and Iran. We know that Iran has probably agreed to supply drones to Russia, which it needs for its offensive in Ukraine. So we are seeing, I would say, a kind of an emergence of an anti-West axis, which is taking shape.
Okay. All right, let me go across to James M. Dorsey. I'm also going to ask my producers to try and see if we can route some of the live pictures, either the pictures that we're getting from the Taipei airport or flight radar, flight tracking data, which we can route onto our big screen here and see where this particular flight, it's a SPAR-19, a military aircraft that's taken off from Singapore a couple of hours ago. It's a 4.5-hour flight between Singapore and Taipei, and she should be there, according to Flight Radar 24, by 7:30 India time. But in the meanwhile, let me go across to James M. Dorsey. What was the compelling or particular need for Nancy Pelosi to visit Taiwan at this given point of time, especially when, just a couple of weeks ago, you had the U.S. president say that the Pentagon doesn't think that at this time it's such a good idea. So what's changed?
Well, first of all, I think it's important that Joe Biden said the military doesn't think it's a good idea. Correct. He did not say that he thinks it's not a good idea. He hasn't pronounced himself on that. I think there's one, of course, this is a trip that was long planned. Having said that, Nancy Pelosi was indeed always a hawk on China. She may be looking at her last several months as Speaker of the House, depending on what the outcome is of the U.S. midterm elections. But I think that we need to see things in perspective. This is probably ultimately going to be a storm in a teacup with very high tensions. Sure, the Chinese are going to pressure the Taiwanese in various forms, but ultimately, fact of the matter is that, one, when we're talking about a military aircraft, it's a United States Air Force Boeing passenger jet. It's not a military fighter aircraft. Second of all, the Chinese military movements were going to occur anyways. August 1 was the anniversary of the founding of the People's Liberation Army, and there always are a certain degree of troop and military equipment movements around that period. Second of all, neither the Chinese nor the Americans want a military confrontation, nor do they want a real escalation that would endanger the status quo at this point. The last point I'd like to make, which I heard your correspondent, I think in the earlier show, mention semiconductors. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Both Taiwan, the TSMC produces 80% of the most advanced semiconductors. Both China and the United States cannot afford for that production to be disrupted.
All right, just give me a moment. I want to show the flight tracker data here on our big screen. You can see it's a SPAR-19. It's a Boeing jet. It's not a full-fledged military aircraft. Of course, it belongs to the U.S. Air Force. You can see how it took off from Singapore. You can see a whole bunch of flights there over Changi. It took off at around 4 o'clock India time and then headed first eastwards, and then when it was above northern Sulawesi, and then it made a sharp turn up north. So right now, it's flying above the Mindanao province, the southernmost province of the Philippines, over Davao City, and then thereafter, it will fly in a northwest direction over Philippines, over Manila, and then eventually up into the Taipei Straits and eventually into Taiwan, where she's expected to land at exactly an hour and a half from now. So this is the route that this particular flight is taken. Let me go across to Michael Kugelman. Again, the question that's being asked is, we already have one war that is happening right now, in case people have forgotten, Russia and Ukraine, and we're no closer to getting any kind of result one way or the other in that war. Can the world afford another one?
Well, the answer is obviously no. No one wants another war, neither the Americans or the Chinese or really anyone. But, I think that for Pelosi, the motivations for this visit are multiple. I mean, one could be to really see it through the lens of democracy. The idea that, what Pelosi would want to try to do is to show support for democracy by going to Taiwan. I think that there's a desire simply to underscore that the U.S. Or that Washington would be serious about an obligation to provide support to Taiwan if there were to be some type of conflict. But indeed, it is a very risky gambit at this point in time. I think that, especially given that there had been some signs of a possible détente between the U.S. and China, in that President Biden not too long ago spoke with President Xi. Clearly, this visit is going to squander any of progress that might have been made there. And, obviously, whenever you have a scenario like this, there's always the the risk when things are very tense, the risk for some type of miscalculation or a comment that's stated in a mistimed way that could raise the risk of escalation, and no one has an interest in that. But, final point, I'll follow the lead of James Dorsey in offering a bit more proper perspective. I mean, certainly China, the PRC will view this as a provocation, unfortunately. This is the House Speaker. This is not the Secretary of State. This is not the Secretary of Defense. So in that sense, the fact that Pelosi is making this trip as opposed to a Blinken or an Austin will not, or at least should not, be taken as much of a provocation by Beijing. But indeed, a very risky gambit at a very tense moment, and indeed also at a time when no one can afford another flashpoint, much less another conflict.
All right, give me a moment, Michael. Again, I want to open this up on our big wall. The pictures that you're seeing are on your right. These are live shots from the Taipei airport. And what they've done is, this is the Songshan airport in Taipei. They have projected a giant hologram, I'm given to understand, onto a neighboring building, a skyscraper right next to the airport, with the words, "Welcome to Taipei." This is a live shot of the Songshan airport in Taipei, coming to you live from there. And you can see this giant signage that's been projected onto a nearby building, a skyscraper, with the words, "Welcome to Taiwan." Now, clearly, there's something that the Taiwanese authorities know about this particular flight of Nancy Pelosi, Aspar 19, which is right now flying over Mindanao, over Davao City, expected to land in Taipei in the next hour and a half. Clearly, the Taiwanese, too, realize that the world's eyes certainly are on this visit. The world's eyes are also on what Beijing's next move would be. There are, of course, these mind games that have already started. You're seeing those pictures of the tanks out in Fujian and in Xiamen. Let me go to David Lyon and just give us a sense, a perspective, if you will. The Taiwanese also don't want to come across as increasing the rhetoric. The more you climb, the escalatory ladder of war rhetoric or warlike rhetoric, the more difficult it becomes to climb down.
No, you're right on Taiwan's side, but this does feel extraordinary overreaction on China's part, threatening military retaliation to a visit by a congresswoman. But I think we can also see that it shows China believing that America is much weaker in the region than previously. We've seen President Biden misspeaking a couple of times over Taiwan, needing corrections from his office, from the State Department, to get back to that policy of ambiguity if there were military action in Taiwan. But this all goes back to the withdrawal from Afghanistan last year, what we were going to be talking about in this program. And Afghanistan still very much, I think, in the headlines today because of the death of Al-Zawahiri, but showing America's weakness in the region, the abandonment, betrayal of Afghanistan a year ago, and the sense that Russia certainly moved into Ukraine, possibly misbelieving, mistaking really American intervention plans, American reaction to that. And I think you're also seeing potentially China pushing harder than they might do because they believe America under this administration to be weaker than it was.
It's quite an irony, isn't it? Like David Lyon just mentioned, this is coming on a day when one of the most dreaded terrorists in the world, the founder of Al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri, was killed in a U.S. missile strike, the news of which was revealed in the early hours of this morning here in India, and of course Monday evening for the United States. But the strike itself happened on Saturday, ordered by the U.S. President. The news was broken by the U.S. President in an address to the nation from the South Lawns of the White House. Zawahiri was taken out from a safe house in a place called Sherpur, which is barely a couple of kilometers from the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, barely 3.5 kilometers from the Afghan presidential palace. And coming on a day such as this, how was the world's most dreaded terrorist, a man who was the founding member of Al-Qaeda, the man who was the intellectual brains, if you will, behind Al-Qaeda. It was his brains married with Saudi money, which Osama bin Laden brought to the table, that created this potent, deadly terrorist force which operated with impunity for a good 20 years, for much of that period from the safe havens in Afghanistan. But how was this man able to stay in such a high security part of the Afghan capital, Kabul, without either the Taliban administration there in the Islamic Emirate knowing about it or looking the other way, even if they had information? and more importantly, their benefactors in Pakistan. After all, the building in which Ayman al-Zawahiri was staying was reportedly owned by a member of the Haqqani family. And as you know, the Haqqanis right now are the most powerful entity in Afghan politics. How is it that their benefactors in Pakistan did not have a clue about it either? First the story, and then I'll go to our guests.
Ayman al-Zawahiri, one of the most wanted terrorists in the world, is dead. The Al-Qaeda chief was killed in a drone strike carried out by the US in downtown Kabul. Al-Zawahiri had been in hiding for years, but a few months ago, the CIA traced him to this safe house. Al-Zawahiri was on the balcony when he was targeted with 2 Hellfire missiles early in the morning on the 31st of July. These pictures, which are purportedly of his residence, show the windows blown out on one floor, but the rest of the building appears intact. According to the US, only al-Zawahiri was killed in the strike. His family members were at home but unharmed.
I authorized the
Addressing the nation, US President Joe Biden hoped al-Zawahiri's death will bring closure to the families of nearly 3,000 people who died on 9/11.
To the families who lost fathers and mothers, husbands, wives, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, friends and co-workers on that searing September day, it is my hope that this decisive action will bring one more measure of closure.
It's the biggest blow to the Al-Qaeda since its founder and 9/11 mastermind, Osama bin Laden, was killed in 2011. After bin Laden was taken out in a dramatic night raid by US troops in Pakistan's Abbottabad. It was al-Zawahiri who took over the Al-Qaeda. He rebuilt its leadership in the Afghan-Pakistan border region and was the supreme leader of its branches in Iraq, Asia and Yemen. But just 15 hours before the hit on al-Zawahiri in Kabul, Taliban's Interior Minister Sirajuddin Haqqani told CNN News 18 that the Al-Qaeda has no presence in Afghanistan.
With regard to Al-Qaeda, it has no presence in Afghanistan and is no more a threat, and the world is required not to feel threatened about the already dead outfit.
So did Ayman al-Zawahiri receive sanctuary from the Taliban following the group's takeover of Afghanistan last year?
All right, let me go back to our guests. Ambassador Rakesh Sood, for someone who had such a huge bounty on his head for 20 years, the Americans were after him, the Pakistanis supposedly were after him, and so was the former Afghan government. How is it that Ayman al-Zawahiri was able to stay out in a safe house right in the heart of Kabul, and seemingly no one had a clue about it?
Well, let me just say that, yes, the Americans were after him, but you added to that by saying that the Pakistanis were after him, or that the Taliban government and Taliban regime in Kabul was after him. I would not say that the other two are in the same category, because it's quite clear. In fact, if you saw the report by the UN Security Council Sanctions Monitoring Committee, which came out in the month of June, I mean, it said very categorically that the links between the Taliban regime and Al-Qaeda continue, and it cited the approximate number of Al-Qaeda fighters that are currently in Afghanistan. So I see absolutely, it is quite understandable that Ayman al-Zawahiri, well, it's a bit of a surprise that he was staying in Sherpur. Sherpur is really, it's a very, Sherpur is a suburb which, as the report said, is very central, downtown Kabul. It has houses, huge houses with very high walls, because a lot of Afghan political leaders, warlords, have had their houses there. So they have these huge walls, and some of them even have anti-aircraft gun locations in these on the corners of these walls. Mm-hmm. So it is a fairly secretive kind of a house, in the sense that you can't make out anything from the outside. But it's about as surprising as Osama bin Laden being found in Abbottabad. I mean, under the nose. So that's how I would take it.
Michael Kugelman, vis-a-vis what this may mean for Pakistan, we know on the one hand, the U.S. authorities have said that they did keep Pakistan in the loop, particularly for use of its airspace, as we are given to understand, when this operation was planned and when this operation was undertaken. But more importantly, the fact that the Haqqanis now are the de facto power in that country, and the Haqqanis, at least on record, have said that they had no idea that Zawahiri was living in the safe house right under their nose. What may this mean for U.S.-Pak ties?
Well, I mean, there's still a lot of details about this operation that we don't know yet, such as whether Pakistan actually may have provided some form of assistance to the U.S., whether that entails the use of its airspace, which I certainly don't think could be ruled out, or even possibly providing some intelligence after the U.S. had discovered where he was. As I understand it, the planning for this operation lasted a number of months, about 6 months, I believe. So if there was if there was any type of Pakistani assistance, then certainly that would obviously reduce the chances that that tensions could emerge from everything that played out here. But indeed, it's quite significant that Zawahiri was in a home that was run by the Haqqanis or those connected to them. That's critical. But my sense is that Pakistan, well, has been very quiet. Islamabad, I don't think, has issued any type of formal statement about what happened. It's got all kinds of problems at home with its economy and with political uncertainty. I think that it would prefer to stay quiet and hope that tension dies down and questions are not asked, though certainly questions will be asked. But I would think that really it was the Taliban that one has to think of it. There's no way that Zawahiri could have been living where he was for so long without the Taliban top leadership knowing about it, and especially given the connection to the Haqqani. So this operation, I think, really was a big blow, not just to Al-Qaeda, but also to the Taliban, maybe even a bigger blow to the Taliban, because it has shattered once and for all the myth propagated by the Taliban that there are no longer links between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Also, if you had some members of the Taliban that might have provided some help to the U.S. by providing some intel, some renegade Taliban, if that was the case, that could really exacerbate what already are from some pretty significant divisions within the group. And finally, I think that the discovery of Zawahiri in Kabul shows that the Taliban violated the Doha deal with the U.S., which stipulates that the Taliban not let any threat to the U.S. be based on Afghan soil. So big blow to the Taliban for sure.
David Lyon, what does this mean for Al-Qaeda? Does the organization itself disintegrate? Do the Qaeda then join other terrorist organizations? Or what happens to the idea of Al-Qaeda?
No, I think we're going to see Al-Qaeda in the strong position that it's been in, with the safe haven that it's now got in Afghanistan. That UN report that Ambassador Sood mentioned talked about Al-Qaeda's propaganda arm becoming much more successful than it's been before, them even replacing Islamic State internationally. That's very important for the recruitment of young jihadi fighters. Islamic State have been carrying out a number of big attacks in Afghanistan in recent months, but Al-Qaeda, it appears, have more of a propaganda success than Islamic State in the country. And the man who's carrying that out, Abdul Majid al-Maghrebi, is one of the key likely successors. He's the current so-called general manager for Afghanistan and Pakistan for Al-Qaeda, and he is a potential successor. He's the son-in-law of Ayman al-Zawahiri. They certainly lose the intellectual coherence that they had because of al-Zawahiri's presence in the country. But it really means, and I absolutely agree with Michael Kugelman here, this is a big blow and it shows just how hollow that American deal was with the Taliban in 2020. Just what little assurance America got from the Taliban in order to pull out from the country and abandon it, hand it over to the Taliban effectively.
No, so, James M. Dawsey, in terms of what this means for the Taliban, we know that the country's been trying to have some kind of normal relations with certainly its neighbors. They were trying very hard for a representative at the United Nations last year. I don't know if they will get one this year. Vis-a-vis India, for example, India had sort of begun the legwork to have some kind of an informal mission, if you will, there to try and have informal contacts with the Taliban. Will the discovery of Zawahiri and his taking out right in the heart of Kabul, right under the nose of the Taliban leadership, will that dent a further blow to the Taliban's attempts to try and normalize its ties with its neighbors and with big powers?
Well, I think I would agree with the other speakers that this is a tremendous blow for the Taliban. Keep in mind that no country has recognized the Taliban regime. The international community across the geopolitical divides has demanded that the Taliban demonstrate that they are able to control groups operating out of Afghanistan, improve women's rights, and basically have an inclusive government. They haven't fulfilled any of those promises. Having said that, I think it was clear from day one, the day that the Americans withdrew from Afghanistan, the Taliban took over, that they were not going to be expelling militants from Afghan soil. What is also clear is that whatever attacks have taken place from Afghan soil since then have been carried out by the Islamic State, particularly rockets being fired into Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, not by Al-Qaeda. The other point I would make is that there is some debate about what Al-Qaeda still represents. Nelly Lahoud, a researcher who went through the papers that were confiscated during the raid in which bin Laden was killed a decade ago, basically demonstrated that Al-Qaeda was no longer in control and no longer really operationally capable. Zawahiri is yes, he is the man who helped shape Al-Qaeda. He was probably one of the masterminds of 9/11, but he's been a shadow of himself in many ways since the killing of bin Laden. He's not been able to fulfill bin Laden's shoes in terms of his charisma, in terms of his personality, in terms of his personal relations. So in many ways, yes, the UN report, as my colleague said, rightfully said, reported that Al-Qaeda is much stronger in terms of its propaganda, but it's not much stronger necessarily operationally, which is not the case for the Islamic State.
All right, we'll leave it at that. James Dorsey, David Lyon, Michael Kugelman, Rakesh Sood, thank you very much, gentlemen. This is a story that we'll be very, very closely tracking its implications for India, for Pakistan, for subcontinental ties, and of course, the whole war on terror, as it were. I want to thank all our guests. Before we go, if you can pull up the flight tracker data as well as the live footage that's coming in from the Taipei airport. This is the story that we're following through the next couple of hours, at least here on CNN News 18. This is the live flight tracker data of the flight that Nancy Pelosi, the U.S. House of Representatives Speaker, has taken. It's a SPAR 19, a Boeing jet owned by the U.S. Air Force. It has now taken a northward direction. It's flying over the Mindanao province in Philippines. It is now headed straight up to Taipei. As Pelosi heads to Taiwan, there's been confirmation now. Tensions are running high between the United States and China, and certainly between Taipei and Beijing. The Japanese media is now reporting that at least 8 U.S. fighter jets and 5 refueling planes took off from the U.S. military base in Okinawa. This is at 8 o'clock local time in Japan. That's about 5:30 here in India. Reports also saying that they may be going to provide perimeter security for Pelosi's plane. So you got all the drama building up over the Taipei Straits, over the Philippines, over the South China Sea, as this flight, the SPAR 19, makes its way to Taipei, to the Songshan International Airport, from where you're getting these live shots. You can see a giant projection on that big skyscraper saying, "Welcome to Taiwan, welcome to Taipei," presumably for Nancy Pelosi. But this is a huge story. It's a riveting story that we are going to be right on top of all through our prime time here on CNN News 18. Japan has now confirmed that at least 8 American fighter aircraft and 5 refueling aircraft have taken off from Okinawa. They are headed, we don't know where, but it's likely that they could be headed to provide perimeter security to Nancy Pelosi's flight, which is just about an hour away from touchdown in Taipei.